Well, what's up, everybody? This is Sean. This is Sean with Easy Street Billiards. I got Vic in the back. Today's, what is it, Thursday, April 30th, AMA today. We're going to talk about a lot of different stuff. I think we could probably just generally categorize a lot of this stuff under preparation and execution. However, there's a lot of different things. So I'm going to go ahead and just get started. If anybody that is watching has anything to say, Vic is on the chat, so she can help jump in there. I'm just going to go ahead and quickly go through a bunch of different stuff that came up this week with some people that I know. They're asking about what to talk about. So here we are. The first concept I want to talk about is dealing with external distractions and internal comforts to break the cycle of losing. This is basically being unsuccessful in your execution of prep work and just understanding about how to learn how to defeat particular opponents, I guess. So that's a pretty good place to start. So I think probably the first thing that, if we're talking about external distractions, and I'd even consider this internal distractions as well, any distraction ultimately is something that I think a lot of people deal with. I deal with it, certainly. So if you don't have to deal with that, that would be awesome. I'm sure you're a highly effective person. So I think that the first thing that I want to speak about with distractions is just that what you consider and define a distraction to be. And in pool, I would say that this is in general, a distraction is anything that is taking your awareness away from whatever your current goal is that's in front of you. So, for instance, in pool, if you're playing 9-ball or whatever and you're in a tournament and then you're down on your shot and you see or there's a ruckus or whatever in the external background, and that takes you away from your goal of shooting this shot successfully through taking your awareness from the place that it is and wants what you want it to be and putting it on another thing. I think that it's pretty common. I know you don't have to describe like every single distraction. It could be anything. A rock in your shoe is a distraction and needs to be dealt with in a similar fashion. You either have two options. One, you do nothing and you just accept the burden and you deal with it as such, or you do something about it. There's not really, maybe there's other things, but I would say those are the things that you can control. You're either going to do something or you're not going to do something. So if you're going to do something, meaning like if there's people out there arguing or whatever, and you're going to stop what you're doing and go and start talking to those people about how they're misbehaving and it's your shot right now, I don't really think that's an effective strategy in general. You can do that once in a while, if someone is being particularly like, they're not paying attention to what's really going on. Maybe there's a guy standing right here talking that way on the table next to you while you're playing in the tournament, and the guy's just like, doesn't even know that you're there, in which case you can be like, hey, bud, kick rocks. I'm here. You know what I mean? Not like that, of course. That would be simple. But other things is like, well, in general, you just really, the move is you have to learn how to accept that it's happening and then execute anyways. And there's not one proven method to that. I would say that the more relaxed you are and the more familiar you are with what you're about to do, the easier and simpler it is to execute when there are potential distractions that can take you off your spot. I would say that there's a lot of different techniques that you can work on. I would say that if you're prone to being distracted in competitive environments or loud environments, then the best thing to do is to play more in those environments so that you can get used to it and you can start to see that the distractions are more because you're not aware of your surroundings in general as much as you could be. And then when things start to happen, you're not aware of it right away. And then all of a sudden it becomes a big thing and now you can't look away. And a lot of that has to do with zooming in too far to what you're doing and not having the proper zoom with the way that you're doing it. When I play pool, I'm not necessarily like so tunnel visioned on what's happening here that I can't see what's going on around me and I can't sense what's going on around me. If you have no sense of what's going around in your environment and then something comes into that and then all of a sudden it's there, it's going to be very easy to all of a sudden now take your awareness from the thing, and then now you're looking at the distraction. Now, if you had been aware that the thing was there the whole time, and now it starts to come in, and now it's here, but you already saw it when it was back here, it's not as much of a distraction because you already saw that it was there. You're aware of it enough to take note of it, but now it's not going to trigger an emotional response, because what's happening is that, well, now that you see that something is potentially going to come in front of you to distract you, then you can make a move at that moment before it's a crucial moment. Where now, if you're in the process of your motion of your shot, for instance, you can't just stop so easily when the thing happens. Now, however, if you saw that thing happening and you just waited for it to end before you got down on the shot, you can see how that is a way to deal with that distraction without really putting yourself in a situation where your emotions are going to be tied to the thing that's happening, because you're making an allowance for something. You're accepting that it's happening, and then you're going to do something about it in a different way necessarily. Or there's other things you're like, you know what, today I decided that actually what I'm going to do is work on not being distracted, and such that I am going to realize when I'm being distracted that that's what I actually showed up here to do, is to realize that I was being distracted at a certain point, and then it's like, what was I going to do when I started feeling distractions, and then my awareness is taking me away from the shot in front of me, and exercise and implement that strategy to get you back into the game. And then as you practice that, then that can help. I think that a lot of the distractions are like, well, it's only really a distraction if this is a meaningful activity, so much that you feel like it needs to be perfect and that any distraction is going to make you fail. And then now you're maybe, the narrative is building you to a spot where you need perfect silence or whatever, or you can't. Maybe another thing that you can work on, to help is just when you're playing pool in an environment with socially where there's other people, is take a look at, okay, this is different than me practicing at home or practicing when there's no one here. And that part of the practice of playing these social events is to be able to operate in a crowd and operate and still do your thing. And it's part of the, like, paying your dues of learning how to be successful in tournaments, because tournaments and competitive play, a lot of it is that you have to wait for other people to shoot. You have to see there's other people moving around, and that's all part of you operating within the construct and the framework of what's going on. And then if you're in denial of certain things, like you expect everyone to see that you're down on the ball, or that you're shooting an important shot, and that you're doing all these important things, and then now you're thinking that they're supposed to act a certain way. Meanwhile, they are actually doing exactly what you were doing. And there's nothing wrong with that. The thing is that you got to decide, okay, am I going to be the one that gets distracted and then has an emotional response because of the distraction that I'm feeling, and that causes me to fall, away from my feelings that I'm confident, and then now I'm in this struggle? Or am I the guy that just is like, yeah, this is just how it always is, actually, and that I'm okay with all of that, and that it's not a different surrounding so much that I even need to be affected mentally by it. This is standard, everyday stimulus. There's nothing different about this tournament than another tournament, and that my expectation is that it will be the way I want it to be is really what's in the way of me understanding what's actually happening and dealing with the truth of what's going on versus the way I am hoping that it will come out, you know? So I think that as far as dealing with distractions goes, a lot of it is you're choosing to accept the distraction into your worldview as such, and then it causes problems. And if you look at it, instead of labeling it as a distraction, is that I was in a challenging situation where my awareness was being pulled to this other thing, and now I'm choosing to take it as a project that I will continue to learn how to focus on the task at hand, regardless of external stimuli that may be taking me away from wanting to do my thing exactly the way I want to, by just lessening my ability to put my energy into it because I'm putting some energy into the other thing. So let's move on. I think that's pretty clear. Do you have anything to add to that? No? Okay. Yeah, it's just, okay, so breaking the cycle of losing. Okay, this is a good one. So I think that it's pretty easy to see that people have, you know, as you're progressing up the ladder in pool, is that there's a lot of other players that are also progressing. And then there's also a lot of players that are kind of where they are. And then through life circumstances, they're not necessarily being able to improve necessarily because they can't put time in. Maybe they have a full-time job and they're kind of just like, they come out once a week and they're trying to get better and they're putting in their efforts, but it's more about maintenance at that mode. Then maybe later that things will change and they can put more time in, and then they can actually make headway into improvement, because you do have to like grind quite a bit in a sense of like, you got to work on things and work on individual skills in order to get better at pool. And there's always so much like tournament play that will sharpen your skills up to a point, because you can only really get better at tournaments through playing tournaments, but then the actual shots themselves that come up in the tournament that you're failing at, you can't really practice in a tournament. You can, my opinion about that kind of stuff is like, you can practice it outside and then you're hoping to be able to shoot it in a tournament to prove to yourself that you can now do the shot when it matters. And that's part of like how you get better. And it's the same thing in a similar vein as when you're trying to learn how to beat an opponent that's had your number forever, and now it becomes in your mind a psychological thing where you maybe look on paper like, well, there's no reason why I should lose to this person so often that I do. You know, it's like, you know, my skill set matches up pretty comparably to that person's skill set. It just seems to be as though every time I'm in, you know, everything is just how it is. And it's like, well, the narrative is a key thing here, where if you believe in yourself enough to say to yourself that I'm capable of overcoming any challenge that I'm facing through my own efforts and through my will to improve and to learn and to get better, then if you can take that mindset and then you apply it to this scenario where you're like, okay, bro XYZ keeps beating me and I don't feel like it should be that way. Now what I need to do is create a narrative that has nothing to do with what I did to beat that person, but has more to do with the fact that I'm allowing myself in the future to be better than that player. And that at some point, because I'm continuing to improve, and this has to do with, you got to do the math about it. That player may not be improving. If you're, you know, pay attention to Fargo's, you can see like, if his Fargo is not, or her Fargo, whoever's Fargo is not gone up or down in the last 5 years, they are not getting better. They may, you know, have good days and bad days, but they're not improving. And then once you see that most people that are getting older are not really getting better, now you should realize, as an improving player, eventually I will be better than them if I continue to put my work in. And that's the narrative that you have to have, is that, well, when is it going to happen that I am better than that person? And that is the question that you really have to answer, is like, well, it won't happen until I let myself do it. Because I can play worse whenever I want to, whenever I choose to. And it's not so easy to play better whenever I want to and whenever I choose to. And part of the narrative is like, well, this guy always has my number, is you choosing to play worse than you can play in a narrative sense. If you think of the narrative as like, okay, well, I'm controlling my narrative as well, is that, well, eventually I will get better and I will be able to beat that player. And maybe today's that day, and that now my goal is just to look for those moments when I previously played under my potential because I was acquiescing to a narrative that that player has my number, and that today I'm not going to acquiesce to that definition of what my game looks like. The definition of my game today is that it's one ball at a time, and that when I'm at the table, no one is stopping me from doing what I'm doing. I can craft a narrative through observing what my opponent is doing, where I can then decide in my mind, it's like, well, he is the player that I'm competing against has these habitual things that they do, both good and bad, things that help them and things that hurt them. And that if I take an objective viewpoint about what their relative strengths and weaknesses are, their attributes, their embodiments, then I can make a strategy that will allow me to take advantage of the things that they're not good at, and then try to eliminate the things from their game that are really strong by steering away from that. By taking people from a place where they're confident and putting them into where they have a question about whether or not they can win. Now you're setting the stage for a narrative shift, not only in yourself, because ultimately what you're also looking for is a narrative shift in your opponent, where they are now acquiescing to the new narrative which you're imposing, which is that I'm actually better than you are, and that I'm proving that to you by playing better than you are, and that you are going to have to fight for it now. And if you don't, then I'm just going to win every time, actually, and that you don't have my number anymore. In fact, I have your number now. And that eventually that will happen to everyone if you continue to target the next level, and then realize that if they are not putting in the work that you're putting in, that there's no reason why they should be confident. I should be confident because I'm the one doing the work. They are not doing the work. They don't deserve to win necessarily because they're not working. They're just living off the residual of what they've already done, and that somewhat people live off of the legend or their credibility in the community, not so much that they play great when it's time, but just that other people expect them to win against certain people. And then when those people play them, they're also expecting to lose. And that allows the better player to win, even when the better player is not demonstrating superior technique at that moment. And that is a very common thing that I think that any good player could definitely relate to. I definitely relate to it. I see people so much of the time missing balls that are pretty routine against me, and I chalk most of it up to the fact that they actually think that they're supposed to lose, more so than they realize that it's just one shot at a time, and that there's no one stopping you. But a lot of that is that in their mind, they can't accept a narrative where they win because they don't know what they would do if they won. And that's part of where you have to build the narrative. It's like, well, what are you going to do when you finally beat that player that has your number? How are you going to act? Like, what's your life going to be like? And start to think about that and start to move yourself in that direction as being that player that actually is doing the thing, that is manifesting the higher levels of pool. you know, through their efforts, not just through like, I'm going to show up and I'm going to hit millions of balls and I'm not going to think about what I'm doing. And then I'm going to expect that everything is just going to work out for me. The narrative of that is just not, you know, maybe it's fun, but it's like if you're trying to get better at pool, there's definitely a lot more to it than that. So the narrative has to be always, I think, in effect at a certain level of being like, what's my real narrative here? Because that can help you give clues as far as like what your confidence level is. You know, if the narrative is that like I'm playing poorly right now and that it doesn't seem like anything is working out for me and my opponent is playing good pool and it's a struggle and I don't think I can win, and then, you know, that's not a confident narrative. You know, even if you're losing, you can have a confident narrative, which is that it doesn't matter what's happened up to this moment. It doesn't matter what's going to happen next. What matters is that I'm ready to take my best energy and send it into the next shot and the next opportunity that I have. And that I don't have to like be nervous at this moment, because I know that when my turn comes that I'm going to do my best and that I can sit here peacefully and observe the situation, knowing that that's the best thing I can do, because when the balls are moving, there's information that's coming to you and you can use that information to help you. And if you're spending your energy thinking about how you might lose when the balls are moving, instead of watching the balls move and understand how the physics is in operation here and using that information that you're getting through them playing pool, then there's a difference between you and me. Because when I'm playing pool and I'm watching someone else play pool, if I don't feel like I have control of the table as far as my own controlling the balls and going where I want, and I'm trying to look for answers, the answers are on the pool table. The ball's moving. It shows you when they strike the ball, if they're hitting them clean, you can see the strike. If you know what you're looking at, you can approximate the strike, and then you can start to like develop the stroke for the table that's that universal speed or whatever you call it that works on that table, and that you can summon that if you see it, and that your opponent cannot hide that from you if they're playing well. And that because of that, it doesn't matter how well my opponent's playing. In fact, if they're playing better, it almost makes it easier, because now you can really see what it looks like to see good pool, and then now you can actually start doing it. It's not hurting you, it's helping you. It's hard to play good pool when other people are playing like trash, in a way, because it's easy to start playing down to your opposition and acquiescing to their emotional needs that they have, that they're like disappointments and all that. And then you start feeling sympathy, and then now all of a sudden your vibration is lowering and you're not playing at the higher energy state that you need to play your best game. You're, you know, and but some people, they don't understand that when you're playing against better players, they're coming at you with a stronger emotion that is helping them win. And that narrative is the thing that if you just like resonate with what they're doing, you're probably going to lose, because the whole thing is like, well, I'm going in there. This is me. I'm going in there and like, I'm always assuming that the best thing is going to happen no matter what. It doesn't matter if I win or lose, because at least if I lose, then I'll learn something from that experience. And then at any time that I feel like any sort of negativity creep in, then I know that that's my project. It's like, oh, well, I'm starting to feel a little bit of a negative emotion. Where's that coming from, and what can I do about it? And then how can I just, you know, let that go and then move myself to the next higher emotional state, because I know that when it's my turn, that's where I want to be to begin, you know. So as you're progressing and trying to find out how to beat the better player, so much of it is like, well, if your narrative is that you're struggling and that you have trouble with these people and that you don't really know what to do, then, you know, all you got to do is just, well, you know, create a narrative where in your mind you've already beaten them, and that you can see that it's already happened, because you can see that they're beatable. You've watched them lose. You may have beaten them a couple games in a match but never finished. And the thing is it's like, if you've had opportunities that you could have taken to the bank and it's been successful, then that means that they're not stopping you from losing. That now it's up to you to just increase your skill level in the scenarios where you've been failing, and then you'll be successful eventually, sooner rather than later, most likely, because once you can see what you're doing wrong, that's what the actual thing is that is stopping you. You're like, oh, I missed that easy shot, you know, and you're like, well, why'd you miss it? Well, like, well, I was worried about blah blah blah. And like, well, there you go. You got to stop worrying about what blah blah blah, and you got to start thinking about what you were going to do once the ball goes in. That's the problem. You're worrying when you should be hoping. You should be thinking about the good thing that's about to happen. That's the confident you. The worrying you is the one that loses. That's why you can't be the worrying you and win. It doesn't work that way. You know, maybe you will worry and win, but that has to do a lot with your opponent also being more of a worrier than you, and then it degrades typically into a shootout of who makes the last 9 on its own ball, you know, one game at a time, battling the whole way to like make 1 or 2, 3 balls in a row, because both players are so worried about not playing well that they can't play well. You got to just shake all that off and be like, you know what? I know that he's beat me in the past. This is a good opportunity for me to prove myself, because my opponent that I'm looking at beating is, you know, it's like the next level up, where if once I attain that level, then that's a big gap between here and there. But the skill level of my skill set versus my opponent's skill set may not be that great, like I said. So you just got to really spend energy thinking about how it's going to be when you beat them, and then just be positive as much as you can, and eventually it will happen. You know, they will give you the moments where you can be successful, and now your goal is to see those moments and capture them and take advantage. All right, let's go to the next thing. There was a question asked earlier this week, and it's just a bunch of different things: breathing, focus, pre-shot routine, thought process, how to train, what to do a week before big events, diet. I think that a lot of this stuff has to do with like how you are, what's your process. So I think that to me, it's pretty simple. If you're a healthy person, that's the best thing you can do when you're playing pool, is be healthy. So if whatever your definition of healthy is in your mind, you should be trying to do that and use those habits as a generic framework for how you play the game. You know, if you know, if you drink too much caffeine, you're going to have energy level spikes and ups and downs. It's typical for people that drink more caffeine to have higher levels of anxiety through the extra adrenaline function that you get. And that if you feel like you're an anxious person, or you feel a lot of anxiety and you drink caffeine, you're actually doing it to yourself. That's part of understanding what's healthy and what's not healthy, is knowing the effects of the chemicals that you put into your body, and then understanding that that's part of what makes you how you are, is through what you do to your body. So if you're eating like trash and then you play a match, it's more likely you'll play worse than if you ate a good meal or an appropriate meal before you played that match. And that's just like, well, you got to do the math. You're either adding to your life through your actions, or you're subtracting from it through your actions. And, you know, so as far as like, you know, if you stay loose, you stay limber, you stay mobile, then now when you're playing pool, especially if you're a little bit lighter, you don't want to be heavy, because if you're going to play a 2-day tournament, you're going to be walking around a lot. Wear comfortable shoes, you know, all the stuff. But this is all just like healthy behavior. You should be doing that anyways. That has nothing to do with pool. That's just life. Eating well is life. You should be doing that anyways. You know, like making good decisions for yourself is what you should be doing. It's like pool is just a simplified version of what's really going on in reality, minus the fact that pool is when you're competing against a pool, it is a zero-sum game. And the way that the world works actually is it's not zero sum. There's actually an abundance, because there's an energy source that's external to the earth, which is the sun that shines on us the whole time, that applies energy into the earth. So because of that, there's extra energy that's not having to be, you know, utilized necessarily efficiently. Now, when you're playing pool and you're competing, there's a scarce amount of resources. So you're artificially creating a scarcity situation where there's only so many wins to get, you know, based on the situation. So you gotta realize it's a simplified version of life. So anything that helps your life is going to help your pool game in general. So, you know, if you meditate, it helps you focus. It helps you be aware of your own thoughts, helps you control your thoughts. That helps your pool game, you know. Learning how to breathe properly through training your, you know, breath work or whatever. There's like certifications you can get. You can meditate. You can work on your breathing. I certainly do. I try to breathe as much as possible when I'm playing pool, in an active sense of, I know that one of the ways that emotions are triggered in your body and are noticed in your body is through the physiological response of your body to the emotion itself. Once you've attached to an emotion, you start to feel it. And then that feeling is actually a collection of sensations of like your, you know, body temperature, surface temperature, sweating, breathing rate, depth of breathing, heart rate. All those things are like on a low level sensory experiences that you're using to then tell you that you have an emotional condition going on that you may not be aware of, because you're thinking thoughts that are creating an emotion, and then your body is responding to the thoughts as though you're there. And then now your physiology is changed to match the emotion that you've attached yourself to. So one of the things to do is to reverse engineer that, and actually to enforce a breathing, a rhythm, a state of being over the top to control how your emotions are affecting you, and to eliminate and reduce negative feelings of emotion through controlling your physiology actively through mindfulness techniques like breathing. Let's see, what else do we got here? Focusing is really just, if you have troubles, like say, you know, maybe you've been diagnosed with attention deficit disorder, and that you have trouble focusing on things, and that you get distracted easily, you know, they say that meditation is very helpful for that. I don't know necessarily if it's even a real condition. It's more about, I think it has to do more with your value system, and how you can convince yourself that you're interested in something. You know, if you're really, really interested in something, then it's almost like time stops happening, and you're just like in the moment, absorbed in it, having fun. And if you're being constantly distracted by things, a lot of that has to do with the fact that you haven't figured out a way to tell yourself that you're enjoying yourself, and that to keep you in the moment. You know, your emotions can tell you that, like, oh, well, I'm feeling this discomfort, and that sucks, and that I need to feel bad because of that. And then that takes you away from the fact that the discomforts would be gone and disappeared, and not even sensed necessarily as such if you were enjoying yourself. You know, if you're like having the time of your life, you know, all day long, and you go on this whatever crazy, you know, you're going to be tired at the end of that day. And you're not necessarily going to think about how much effort you put into it, but you are going to think about how much fun you had. And that's kind of the gist of what you want to be doing with pool, is you want to try to enjoy it as much as you can, so that the discomforts disappear on their own. You don't have to think about them to make them go away. You just don't care, because I'm actually enjoying myself. Like, excuse me, part of the challenge of pool is to take something that's very cyclical and routine and happens again and again and again, and try to find novelty in it. And that novelty, and finding that novelty, is what makes the game fun. And then that actually reduces the effect of any discomforts that are happening. So yeah, like training. Okay, what to do a week before big events. I would say that, you know, you should be training as much as you can all the time if you're trying to get better at pool. I wouldn't necessarily say that you know, I can't speak for being a top pro or anything like that, but being 680 Fargo, my opinion is that if you don't play pool every day, and you could be playing pool every day, that you're not doing it right as far as you could be. With that being said, it's not so important. I don't think that you hit balls every day. It depends on your values and what is important in your life, because obviously everything that you're doing is a sacrifice or a trade-off, so to speak, from everything else. So if you've you know, taken enough of your resources to the side and you said, oh, I'm going to like spend the money to go to an event, and that I'm going to go and play this event, and then because I'm spending all this resources anyways, then I should expend extra resources to try to maximize the benefit of that experience. And that I would say then what I would do first is examine exactly the scenario that you're going to go into, and try to approximate and simulate as many of the exact same things as you can with the tournament or competition that you're going to be competing in, as much as you can. So for instance, if you're playing in a race to 9 10 ball event, then on a 9-foot table, then I would recommend finding a 9-foot table to practice on, practice some 10 ball, you know, if there's, you know, and just practice the game, you know. And if you're good enough to like break and run racks, then my recommendation would be to just work on your break, because the better you break, the easier the game is. And that if your break gets to a high level and then you can start to break and run racks, then now what you can do is just see, okay, well, what shots am I failing on these break and run opportunities, and then practice those shots. And then, you know, that's your offense. And if you have a good moving game, then I wouldn't necessarily say that practicing the moving game is that important. For me, I don't ever practice the moving game. It's the moving game is a different thing to me. It's like each place that you put the ball has a certain thing. It's more about like, the moving game to me is the same as the offensive game. Every shot is you move the cue ball with your stick, and it goes and hits a ball, hits a rail or whatever. And then ultimately there's a final position of the balls. And that all that is, you have to choose a shot that's physically possible. And that any shot that's physically possible, you should be able to execute with a certain percentage. And now it's a question of whether you've decided to shoot a shot that is high enough percentage to accomplish and is physically possible. And that once you've decided that my percentage of choosing a move versus choosing an offensive shot either increases my percentage chance to win or reduces it, then you'll know what to do. It doesn't matter how good you are at any of it. It has more to do with your ability to understand what you're capable of and what the table is going to allow you to do. So I think that if you're going to play in a big tournament, that it helps to compete a little bit more beforehand so that you can get used to match play if you haven't been, and practice your offense, practice your defense if you can, but that's more against playing against this particular opponent, I would say. And that for myself at least, and, you know, try to, in your mind, put yourself in the best position to where your narrative is such that you can have a good outcome. If you go into it knowing that you didn't practice and you didn't do the things and you've been eating like trash and that you haven't been thinking about how successful you're going to be, and you haven't, you know, and your exercise regimen is not great, so you're physically a little bit weaker than you could be, and you take all of those accumulated stories and you bring them into a tournament, you know, and you flew in the morning of instead of flying in the day before and getting good rest the night before. All those things are just different ways that you're just basically throwing landmines out there to jump on over time, by like things that you could have prevented through your actions that you didn't, accumulate into the story of why you can't be successful, you know. And it's not to say that all of those are going to stop you. It's more about how you feel about them that matters than anything. If you are the kind of person that is able to just be like, yeah, you know, none of that really matters. You know, I play good. I'm here to have a good time. My main focus is, you know, taking a relaxed approach to everything, and that's how I want to be, you know, then it's definitely possible that you could play good pool even if you're not quite prepared, because you don't care to be prepared and it doesn't matter to you. And the narrative isn't such that you need to necessarily hit a lot of balls to play good pool. It's more about understanding in yourself that is like, well, there's a certain inherent error in everything that I do through just everything is, you know, your body does not move precisely the way you want to every single time. It's not built like that. You know, everything is a little bit different, you know, so if you know what you're about, you can go and do your business, and you don't have to necessarily be in stroke thinking that you're playing your best pool. That's its own narrative, though. You got to think about that. I personally think that, you know, once you're at a certain level, if you want to play solid, you should practice a little bit and get your stroke feeling good, but you don't necessarily have to be playing pool like 50 hours a week, because you could burn yourself out to where you're not enjoying yourself anymore, and now you've gone too far. So it's a little bit of a knowledge of self. So that's pretty much all the stuff that I got from other people. I did want to kind of like expose a couple different topics. I kind of came across. Do we have any comments or anything? No. I had an interesting watching a reel today. I wanted to just speak about for a second about a framework of thinking about how you of called the hats, haircuts, and tattoos framework. And I think that it brought an interesting idea to me, where thinking about your pool game and how when you're making changes or you're working on things, there's some things that are easy to change about your game, and then there's some things that are more difficult, and some things that are really take a long time, and that they're and it the gist of it is that the more superficial the decision is, the less important it is, and that more you should just go ahead and do the thing quickly. And that the more important and long lasting the change is, the more you should really be thinking deeply about the consequences and how things are going to move forward before you execute on the plan. And I thought that was a cool framework to think about, where, you know, if you're going to like work on, you know, a shot or whatever, you can just like work on one shot for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and that will actually help you get better at it. Then you move to a next shot, and so on and so forth. But if you're going to like work on your, you know, your whole body stance, like say you're going to switch your stance from one stance to like another stance, then that is something that takes a lot of time, and that you should think about before I change that, what the effects are going to be. And, you know, and really thinking about also is that when you need to make these changes, that some of them take longer to take effect. And that's also something where it's like, if you're making these deep changes in your game, you have to decide that you're going to hold through to the end. And depending on the size of the change, the magnitude of the change, you need to really commit more energy and more time to making sure that it happens. Otherwise, it won't fully gel, and then you won't make it to the full change. I think that another thing that I wanted to talk about is from a perspective of someone that's trying to achieve the highest level that they can in pool, that one of the things that you have to eventually do is you have to let go of all of your own amateur antics, I guess is a good way to say it, where all the things that you do that you know you shouldn't do because they're not really helping you, but or habits that you formed or other things that it's at some point, if you want to improve, it's about eliminating those things that just don't make any sense from your game, and then putting something in its place that's more professional, And I think a lot of it has to do with, when I speak about stuff like this, I don't speak too much about like your technique. My opinion is the mental side of it is more important. Is that if you think about how a professional or your highest self would respond in a pool situation, and then you think about your typical response in that situation, your goal should be to be more in alignment with what you think a pro should be doing if you're trying to be a professional. And that's a simple way to explain. It's like, if we're going to respond negatively and like, you know, do whatever, or we lose the match, we don't want to shake hands with our opponent. That's amateur hour stuff. And that part of what makes us not play as good is by displaying that kind of stuff, because you know that it's not something that you should be doing. You know, you're not helping anyone by doing that. It's a childish behavior. And that if you're in an emotional state where you're allowing yourself to behave that way, you've lost control. And that is the opposite of professionalism. You need to be in control and have a narrative that allows you to be okay with whatever's going on and respond in a professional way. So as we observe ourselves, we can then move forward through advancing ourselves through just eliminating the negative behaviors a little bit at a time, and being like, you know what, I don't really like how I responded when, you know, bro, you know, slopped the ball in and then ran out on the hill on me, and I got mad, you know, being like, oh, you got lucky, and said, maybe you said something, you know, a little bit, you know, backhand compliment or whatever, and that, you know, later on you're like, I shouldn't have done that. You know, that's an opportunity where a professional would, you know, maybe, you know, the narrative is like, well, that's what happened, definitely, but it doesn't mean that I have to respond with that, you know, respond that way. You know, there's a better way to respond, a way that more is in alignment with your true feelings about being a good person, and realizing it's like, well, you can't, it's not their fault necessarily that they got lucky, and it's not your fault when you get lucky either. It's just the way it goes, you know, and embracing that and being happy for your opponent is part of understanding that at the professional level of pool, it's not really the same thing as what people think about, I believe. It's so much of it's not, it's like realizing there's only so many professional pool players. And I think people forget that when you're on the tour, that you're mostly playing against the same people all the time, and that they become your coworkers where you're competing against the same people. It's just like showing up to the office and saying hi to, you know, the receptionist, and then blah, blah, blah. And then now you sit down next to your homie over here, and it's the same guy. And it's the same thing with playing pool, is that these people are seeing each other all the time, and they're actually friends. And that when you're playing in tournaments and you're new, you don't realize that everybody else is friends, and that you think that you're not friends with these people, and you think of them as adversaries, and you don't realize that that's part of your evolution, is realizing that no one that's here playing against you is actually your enemy, and that we're all here for the same reason, which ultimately, in my opinion, is at the base level because we love pool, and that we want to get better at pool, and that we're putting ourselves into uncomfortable situations so that we can then improve our pool game and our lives. And that because of that, then we should be mutually benefiting from the experience by, well, if you want to play a tournament and then no one else wants to play a tournament, then you can't now get better at playing tournaments. Other people have to agree to do it too. And then you got to create a framework for yourself where you're like, okay, I am behind you getting better, and you are behind me getting better. And that is why I'm not, that's how you don't hold yourself back. By thinking that people are enemies, you're creating a chip on your shoulder. And then when you beat that person, now you're like, oh, I vanquished that foe. I think that's at the beginning of your life, that's easy to see as being fine. But then as you get older, you realize it's like, well, if I'm going to be playing against the same people for 20 years and I'm going to keep treating them like enemies, and I'm not going to be friends with them, and I'm not going to be okay with how they are as people, and I'm not going to forgive them for their behaviors, then, you know, there's no expectation that they're going to do that for you either. It's like somebody has to be the first one. Yeah. Okay. So I lost my train of thought. What was I talking about? Um, right. Exactly. Thank you for getting me back on the train there. Yeah. So part of advancing your pool game is realizing that it's a community and that it's not you versus them. Even when you're like gambling, uh, the point of it is to get better and not necessarily to get money. I mean, getting money is part of being better. That's just, it goes with it, you know. I would say that if you respect yourself and you respect the game, then that is going to allow you to get to a higher level and feel good about it, and that you're showing integrity and learning how to be more, have more integrity is going to be a good thing for your game, and that will help you get better at pool. So much of that, yeah, just letting go of all the like stuff that's just not helping you. It would be, it's huge for your game. It makes you feel better about the way that you are in the room too, and that now it gives you the ability to then even more lean into your own ability to be victorious without having any sort of second guessing whether or not I'm hurting my opponent or diminishing my opponent's value or anything like that. Like, I'm affirming my opponent by playing my best pool because I know that my opponent is here to get better at pool and to test themselves against their opponents, and I am that opponent, and I am going to show them the maximum amount of respect by playing my absolute best pool, and that I expect and hope for that in kind from my opponent to test me to the maximum so that we can then get maximum benefit out of that. And if I don't play up to my true potential, that's okay, because it's not about that. It's about getting out there and doing your best. And that if I play great pool, I'm allowed to do that because I am not doing anything to diminish my opponent, to disrespect my opponent or the game. And that because of that, I have a clear conscience about being a winner. And I think that if you have a clear conscience as a winner, then now you're in a different place than someone that maybe did it, but did a few things that they shouldn't have done, you know, maybe like low key sharking or talking off to the side or whatever, noticeable stuff, you know, that they maybe aren't doing consciously, but are unconscious, like behaviors that happen because their emotions are out of alignment with their highest self, you know, and that you got to forgive people for being that way because they're trying to win. And that when people are trying to win, they're going to do things that they're not proud of until they've decided that it's not about winning, it's about integrity, and that integrity fuels the ability to win without feeling any remorse. And that is, it takes a little while to put yourself in a position where it's okay to just hammer your opponent repeatedly and be okay with that, because that's how it's supposed to be. Actually, you're not supposed to take it easy on anybody when you're competing, because you're not doing anyone any good when you're doing that. You're not helping your own game because you're playing below your potential, and you're not helping your opponent's game by exposing them to what could be great pool that they could then use as a learning experience, where they're like, man, that guy just drilled me. He was so disciplined, and every shot he took seriously, and all those things. And then if I started to embody some of the same principles, maybe I could play better, versus being like, oh, well, yeah, he won, but then he did this thing and that thing and the other thing, and it just pissed me off, and I started playing like trash. And then at the end of that, you're like, nobody got better. You know, I played worse than I could play. They used some low down tactics to try to win, and I wasn't able to overcome that, and it sucked, you know. And it's just like, well, there's two scenarios. I'm trying to choose the one where everyone comes out as a better person. In order to do that, I have to hold up my end of that bargain and not worry about what my opponent's doing, because I don't care. It's not about my opponent. It's about how I'm acting. And if I see my opponent doing that too, I'm going to forgive them because they're here to get better. They have their life that their experiences, and they have their traumas that they're carrying around, and that they're exposing themselves. They're exposing you to their traumas through the things that they're doing, because if they weren't afraid, they wouldn't be doing it. Trust me. All the sharking and all that stuff only happens when they're afraid that they're going to lose. Anyone that is good at pool doesn't need to shark someone that's trash, because they're not going to lose anyways. The only reason why they're even doing all that is because they're afraid. And once you can recognize the fear, then now you realize, like, well, if he's afraid, why am I afraid? I have no reason to be afraid if they're afraid. So as soon as you see fear in someone, you should not be fearful anymore, because they're the ones that actually are ready to lose, because they're the fearful ones. If you're the fearful one, you're ready to lose, because, you know, that's how it is. It's like, it's when people don't realize the other person is afraid, and then it's like, I watch so many players where they're both afraid, and I'm like, why are you both afraid? One of you guys just needs to start being confident, and the other one will just collapse. That's exactly what's going to happen, you know. But then so much of the time, they just can't realize that the other person is terrified, and that's why they're doing all these weird things. You know, it's amazing. And once you can take a step back from that, your game will change. I guarantee it. I think that's basically the time we have. Want to appreciate everyone that's made it to this point, and we'll definitely continue. I have a bunch of more stuff to talk about next time. Any replies, comments, greatly appreciated for direction for the channel. And thanks everyone. Have a great day. We'll see you next time.